Hello, welcome. My friends are sick of me talking about this show, so now I shall subject you to my ramblings instead. Let me just start off by saying this show is so good. It may be a bit cringe to tell your friends to watch maulshadowlord. Holy shit, is it worth it? I was inspired to create some fan art, so you can watch that while I proceed to rant. Spoiler warning, by the way. If you haven't watched this show, go do it right now, and then come back, please. Okay, yes, I did indeed trace pictures in my own hands because I'm lazy. Anyways, I now have a new favorite character.
What fun!
And I cannot stop thinking about the tragedy of Maul ever since. So in this show, we also get to see Maul interact with a whole new cast of characters to get unbearably attached to. But of course, the highlight is the evolving push and pull between Maul and Devon. At the very end of episode 1, where Maul encounters Devon in the prison, holy, I was hooked from that moment. And then their duel. I watched one video explaining lightsaber forms a while ago, and I felt like that Leonardo DiCaprio meme pointing at the screen. So we can see here that Maul is using form 2, which is Dooku's form, signifying finesse and elegance. And then we see her using form 3, which is a more defensive stance, and also Obi-Wan's brain form, which I just know pissed Maul off. I love how they use these forms in order to represent something about the story, because we can see that Devon is essentially trying to defend against what Maul is saying, but he's breaking down those defenses that she grew up with, while he presents himself as something invulnerable and a stronger opponent. And I think this actually works. Seeing Maul's manipulations was like witnessing a work of art. Like, damn, he really did learn from the best. In fact, most of his words did not stray too far from the truth. And that one frame of Devon screaming, I knew then that her fate was sealed. I think the show did a fantastic job of establishing Devon's initial frustrations about the Jedi teachings and the way her and her master were now forced to live. And when Maul noticed that pent-up rage, he was able to target it effectively and unleash it. But the most interesting aspect of their relationship is how Maul doesn't entrap her and lets her return to her master repeatedly to witness fully how helpless he is against the might of the Empire. And when Devon's frustrations are shut down by her master, we slowly see that idea crop up in her mind that Maul is her way of survival in this new world order. She may not agree with his methods.
I see a murderer.
Well, we do what we must to survive.
But sometimes the circumstances are such that there are no good choices to make. Throughout the episodes, we see Daki's philosophy continuously fail, while Maul is able to achieve an edge over the Empire, or at least fight them off. And then, with the death of her master, Devon now has a singular vendetta against the Empire, a personal reason to fight them that connects her to Maul.
Now you have seen the face of your true enemy.
Now they both possess this hatred that no one else is able to grasp or understand, and oh my god, am I excited to see what they get up to in the next season. Recently, I began my foray into Star Wars books, and I read the Darth Plagueis novel, which actually revealed some very important things about Maul. It's technically not canon, but
nobody cares.
Canon is whatever I decide it is. So, our very first introduction to Maul in the novel is when his mother hands him off to Sidious as a baby to save him from Mother Talzin. A bit different from the canon lore, but relatively the same idea. And when Sidious asks what he would do with the child, Mother responds that he can become a powerful asset, which Sidious rightly identifies as servitude before he accepts the offer. And here we see Maul's life and purpose forged. Maul begins and ends his life tied to Sidious, serving him and then turning against him, but always centering his life around him. I think, in a way, Maul cannot envision a life without this crucial connection. We see this clearly in Maul himself commenting on the isolation and superficiality of his existence as Sidious's apprentice, always waiting for his permission to fight, his training becoming more brutal and harsher as time goes on just to serve the needs of Sidious. It is only with learning the ways of the dark side does he feel some sort of purpose. This, I think, is what inextricably ties him to the dark side, even when he is presented with numerous opportunities later to reject or turn. because he was taught and trained for this one thing. He perfected it, found solace in it. He was a tool for Sidious, and the utilization of the dark side became, in effect, a part of his being and identity. This actually separates Maul from the rest of the Sith in a very interesting way. The Sith pride themselves in not being indoctrinated since birth like the Jedi. Rather, they enjoy a natural childhood, experience the troubles of life, and only then they master their art. They choose it of their own will. This is how Sidious, Anakin, Dooku, and many others turned. And once one makes this choice, there really is no turning away. But Maul, much like a Jedi youngling, was made to be a Sith since his youth. Maul had no choice, and now he knows nothing else. His training also differed from many other Sith apprentices, in terms of the lack of knowledge and the respect given to him. Maul was considered a mere instrument, an animal, and woefully excluded from the plans of his master and the Sith. We can see he had no real inkling as to how revenge was to be meted out, with only the orders of his master to really guide him. Thus, his only source of self-worth lied in his effectiveness as an assassin. He was driven by desire to excel, fueled by hate and the need for revenge as he was taught. He had to cultivate pride based on his abilities in order to maintain some sort of sense of self. But that became his downfall the first time, his pride. Now, having been betrayed and abandoned and then resurrected, we see a different version of Maul. He has realized how powerless he truly was. He has lost his pride, his lack of fear that he once possessed. He understands the ways of the world now. The only thing he gains is agency. But Maul, by the nature of his upbringing, is unable to enjoy that agency. Maul will always carry the marks and flaws of his past. He cannot hide behind a mask or some other purpose. He will always be perceived as a ruthless assassin, and no one is willing to look past that. Without anyone around him to direct him to something other than revenge, he falls back into that same pattern. And in truth, it's easier for him to focus on that rage and seek justice rather than confront this powerlessness he feels. So he persists in the only way he knows how. And this is the fundamental tragedy of Maul. Maul is doomed to be who he is forever. Both his survival and ultimate downfall lie in his fruitless persistence for the one purpose he was instilled with since birth by Sidious: revenge. Episode 8 highlighted this really well. In an interview, his voice actor, the amazing Sam Witwer, pointed out that his visions are actually inaccurate. For example, Maul remembers Savage as telling him to continue his quest for revenge, when in reality he had actually said,
Brother, I am an unworthy apprentice. I'm not like you. I never was.
Maul's inner psyche is completely in shambles, and the only way for him to survive is to orient himself towards the one thing he knows how to pursue. It is a dark side which allows him to continue surviving, allows him to protect himself with its gift of concealment, namely concealing himself from himself. In another interview, someone mentioned that Maul is Star Wars' version of Sisyphus. His life is a downward spiral, constantly aspiring toward a goal, and every time he's defeated, he's in a worse state, and yet he begins again, rolling the boulder up the hill, because that is all he knows. Maul becomes defined by his constant failure. He's doomed. Really, he was doomed since the beginning, and the tragedy of it kills me inside.
Hey, what's going on?
How tragic. Well, let's get going. What?
Now, in terms of Devon, I'm very curious which direction the showrunners will take her character. I'm not a huge fan of the revenge ultimately leads to downfall arc, but I think the show executes it very well by clearly setting up the characters' motivations and their flaws, and also the circumstances themselves that make it so difficult to choose between right and wrong, if that even exists. As Maul says, this goes beyond good and evil. When you're faced with such a powerful enemy, it's impossible to stick to your morals steadfastly and win. You have to do terrible things, sacrifice the ideas you stood by, just to even have a chance of toppling the Empire. I think most likely Devon's arc might be similar to Thorfinn's in Vinland Saga, where she might be consumed by revenge temporarily, but then some inciting moment makes her turn around. Or, more interestingly, she might begin a new line of Darkside users in the Star Wars universe. Or she dies, which will be really sad. Honestly, I wouldn't mind either direction because they both hold so much potential if done well. Also, can we talk about the animation for a moment? I felt like a rabid dog watching the screen. Holy shit, the art was scrumptious. I genuinely loved the matte painted backgrounds, the lighting, the brushstrokes, the texture that they used. Everything was absolutely phenomenal. And it serves as a perfect segue into discussing my own art. So this is my final piece. For some explanation, the green lighting was referenced from when Maul demolished the Pike Syndicate, and it also conveniently works as a great contrast and an allusion to Night Sister magic. The red background is meant to be Dathomir, and the twin suns in the corner represent Tatooine, foreshadowing. And of course, the figure in Maul's hand is Devon, facing against manipulations, although she is already holding a red lightsaber. So I wonder what that signifies. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.